Welcome back. As always for Lovecraft Month, I include a film that's what I would consider a new addition to the mythos. Usually, that film is left till last, but because there's been quite a lot of demand and anticipation for the last film this month, I wanted to mix things up a bit, because today's film is particularly special and deserves just as much attention. So, welcome back to H.P. Lovecraft Month. When it comes to Lovecraftian films, not a lot of them take the route of a technological or futuristic setting, making underwater quite unique. However, you may even be surprised to learn that Underwater is a Lovecraftian film at all, because it does hide it well, but that might be to its benefit. When writing a Lovecraftian story, the best way to take people off guard is by not telling them it's a Lovecraftian story. You then have free rein to do any stereotypical thing you want because the lack of expectation and anticipation does the majority of the work for you. So, with all that said, let's get into it. As the opening credits roll, we get a decent bit of information on where this film will be taking place, taking us down the Mariana Trench to a deep-sea drilling platform. And it's very eager to tell us that Station Kepler is very deep under the ocean. The fact that in this film there is a fully working drilling platform in the Mariana Trench tells us this isn't taking place in modern day. It's more than likely slightly futuristic, but we won't get confirmation for that for some time. And to give you an idea of how deep the Mariana Trench is, if you placed Mount Everest at the bottom, the peak would still be underwater by 2 kilometers. We also learn the whole structure of the facility. There's 2 main portions, the Kepler and Roebuck, and in between those is the exploration site. This will be important to know. Also, things get ominous with newspaper clippings of strange sightings, mysterious disappearances, unknown tremors, accompanied with something about new species being discovered. And to top it all off, the company in charge is Tian Industries. And apparently, it's called Tian Industries because of the word Lovecraftian. I know that seems kind of flimsy, but it's true. After the credits, the film continues to hammer home how deep the station is, as we follow the main column down to Kepler Station, which we're told is the command and control for the Roebuck drill. It's quiet inside the station with everyone asleep as the lights continue to flicker, and it's hard to tell if they're supposed to do that. We then meet our main character, Nora, played by Kristen Stewart, and the lights going out don't seem to faze her, so it must be a common occurrence. We then get some narration about losing all sense of time after months underwater, which does 2 things quite effectively. Firstly, it shows us that she's not some new recruit, and she knows the workings of this place up and down, so can be trusted to talk knowledgeably about it. It also gives us a glimpse into her mental state, because she says there's no day or night, just awake and asleep, so she's falling into that going through the motions attitude. Nora continues narrating about an unknown he, referring to him as a glass half full type, which might normally imply she's a glass half empty type, but she does say that's how she prefers it. Nora then spots a spider in the sink, and at first goes to send it down the drain, but something changes her mind as she gently scoops it out of the sink to safety, which is a rather overt piece of foreshadowing. To the spider, Nora is this giant unknown creature with the power to kill or save its life. The spider can't comprehend Nora, and to me, this film is all about humans becoming the spider in this scenario. Also, originally the spider was supposed to be a moth, but they changed it in order to not seem a bit too much like Guillermo del Toro. The station shakes once more with the lights flickering, but something about this one feels different to Nora, and when it happens again, she notices a small leak. But this far down in the ocean, a leak is a big problem. After the rather impressive implosion occurs, the entire station continues to lose structural integrity, as Nora runs around trying to wake as many people as she can, because she knows the safety system will need to start sealing off sections. Interesting little fact about this sequence. They make a point of showing Nora not having a chance to get her shoes on, so Nora is barefoot for quite a while. This is how it was supposed to be shot too, and Kristen Stewart was full gung-ho to do it barefoot. However, it was concluded that for this sequence at least, it was too dangerous. So although she looks barefoot, she has shoes painted pink to look like her feet. Which is kind of weird to think about, really. She's joined by someone else as they get to the other side of a bulkhead. It needs to be sealed, but because they don't have a key, Nora has to activate it manually, showing her technical prowess opening up the panel. But just like with the spider, she still wants to save lives. Some people are running to her, but she's forced to close the door on them just in time, as beyond the bulkhead, the damaged station collapses and separates with a big slow-motion boom, rendering Nora and the other guy momentarily unconscious. I've got to commend the film for getting right into the action and not feel the need to show us all the characters we'll be meeting. They were just like, here's the situation, here's the main character, boom, let's get on with it. Which has the added bonus of us meeting all the rest of the characters mid-crisis and seeing who they really are. Also, before we get back to the action, I just wanted to point out the company name that they're wearing, Pontus. The word Pontus is the Latin for sea, so it's at least an obvious name. However, Pontus is also the pre-Olympian Greek god of the sea, a primordial deity and ally to the original Titans. The double meaning is a clear but subtle piece of foreshadowing, but also it's the first of a few pieces of evidence to imply that the companies in charge know more about what's going on than any of the characters. After waking, an automated voice tells them the problem isn't solved, as more of the station is set to collapse soon. Nora tries to get anyone else on the radio, but there's nothing on the other end, so they decide to make their way to the escape pod bay, with this voice...
Have a complaint? Address it to your superior officer.
Being such a perfectly timed fuck you. Nora and the other guy, Rodrigo, get to the server room, and we've established Nora is a mechanical engineer, hence her prowess with the bulkhead earlier. Rodrigo tries to tell her she did the right thing, but as we've established, she's a glass half empty person, so I doubt it'll work. Kepler is 70% compromised and falling, with no usable radio to contact the surface, but Nora is able to find a workable escape pod bay. Unfortunately, the route to get there is mostly collapsed, so they're going to have to crawl through the rubble, and while making the way through, Nora hears a voice, and underneath she finds another person alive. And surprisingly, for the most part, Abel, played by TJ Miller, is perfectly fine. He's also got with him a small, stuffed rabbit toy that he seems to have a lot of affection for. I'll talk about this rabbit a bit later, but just remember it's there for now. All three continue to crawl through the rubble, with Nora leading, and it's clear she's trying to hold it together, not doing very well in the confined space. What I love about this entire 15-minute opening, in other films, there would be world building and establishing moments, talking about how great this futuristic technology is, and how it couldn't possibly fail, even though everyone in the audience knows it definitely will. They just cut straight to it. So that way, it feels less like a random impossible accident, and instead feels like everything could collapse at any moment, raising the tension for the entire film, and especially for travelling scenes and claustrophobic scenes like the current one. And of Nora finding another person in the rubble, this time dead, can't help much either. But they do manage to reach the pod bay, finding the captain still there, but the pods aren't. The door's jammed, but Nora gets it open quite quickly. She doesn't know why the captain is still here, considering he has a child, so he should have taken a pod. He gives the whole "a captain goes down with his ship" excuse, but there's something else we don't know yet. But at least now the remaining survivors have managed to meet up. In the control room, there's two more, Emily and Smith, and after doing some diagnostics, they find that things aren't good. Not only are all the upper decks collapsed, but the core is unstable, as in another big boom type of unstable, giving them a 30-minute deadline. So the captain comes up with a plan. They're going to go to the Roebuck station, and they're going to need to walk via the use of the submersible suits. It's not the greatest plan. Even Nora's not confident.
Can you just admit we might die doing that?
Yeah. But can you admit that we might live doing this?
They keep calling back to Nora being a pessimist. And this situation is constantly challenging her to be more optimistic. And not optimistic for her own sake, but for the people around her. While they all argue about the plan, Smith plays the last transmission from the drill site, and it's all a garbled mess of strange noises that they can't identify.
Oh, what the hell was that noise?
Ha! Where's Jason Isaacs when you need him?
It's liberate, tutte me. Save yourself.
That's actually something I wouldn't be surprised to see in this film. Smith mentions the water outside has increased by 10 degrees, which Nora points out is impossible. That's kind of glossed over considering all the other much bigger problems, and after everyone freaks out a little and comes to terms with what has to happen, they suit up, with Abel getting enthusiastic.
What? We're gonna do this, let's do it! Alright?
And Emily spots a mural on the wall which depicts strange sea creatures and giant tentacles. I'm sure it'll be fine. They need to get enough helmets together for everyone, which isn't looking likely, and Rodrigo finds a helmet with a crack in it, and it looks like he hands it over to Nora to wear. Everyone else continues to get suits on, with Emily being the most nervous about the walk. Also, you'll notice the suits need to be winched around with chains. That's not a movie thing. Those suits weighed about 130 pounds, which, if they were underwater, it wouldn't have been a big deal, but they weren't. Also, they were airtight, and they made it very difficult to hear the director's instructions. So you've really got to appreciate the ability to act with all that crap still going on. And lastly, you might notice a similarity between these suits and the suits used by the crew of the Nostromo in Alien. I'm pretty sure that's deliberate, and won't be the last deliberate reference either. Everyone's finally ready to go, and Smith says he really didn't like the sound on that transmission, so he and Abel take weapons with them, which is a surprisingly pragmatic thing to do. I never get used to people acting sensibly in horror films, it's so weird. Emily still thinks she can't do it, but Smith talks her round and everyone takes the lift into the water. However, as they get down there and the pressure hits, it's revealed that Rodrigo didn't give Nora the damaged helmet, he took it for himself. Nora notices his helmet just as the door opens, trying to close it again, but it's too late, and Rodrigo suffers from extreme explosive decompression. You have to feel for Nora. That is now, at the very least, the third person she has inadvertently caused the death of through the act of operating a door. Also, Rodrigo's sacrifice needs to be mentioned, because at first, the film makes him look selfish, but really, he did something he knew would result in his death, just so everyone could make the walk. That's why he didn't say anything, even as the helmet began to crack. It was a hell of an implosion, knocking everyone over and around the place, with blood in the water and Emily screaming. It's chaos. However, Nora has a moment of serenity as she stares into the black void of the ocean, and her lights illuminate something moving that goes unnoticed. Sometime later, everyone has recovered, and Nora is taking Rodrigo's death hard. Inside the elevator airlock, she says how he knew the helmet was faulty as expected, blaming herself for his death, with the captain being steady support for her. While everyone is discussing the death, we get a little bit of Nora's story, as she has a picture of, I assume, the he she was talking about earlier. And there's another nice character moment too, with Abel telling everyone the joke Rodrigo used to tell all the time.
What did the fish say when it bumped into the brick wall? Damn. Pretty stupid joke.
I'm not sure why, but the fact that we are experiencing these people's relationships after the fact, as opposed to during or before, makes it all the more believable. I guess it's because it takes the chemistry between actors out of the equation, because all we're hearing is a story, so our minds fill in the blanks of all the things not mentioned. It's a pretty clever way at characterization, admittedly. As the elevator continues to descend, they're notified of a signal coming from the deck below. The captain surmises it's a distress signal from an escape pod, and someone will need to go out there again to search for survivors. And rather surprisingly, Abel is not just a constant jackass, he actually volunteers. Which honestly makes him more human and believable. Because you know, in films there's always that one character, regardless of the situation, constantly making jokes, and when the going gets tough, they step back. So with Abel still having his moments of jackassery, but fully aware of the severity of the situation, is well written as far as I'm concerned. Abel makes sure Emily takes care of the bunny.
Take this bunny. I bequeath it to you. If he doesn't make it, I'll haunt you.
Again, we'll get to that in a bit. Smith and Abel get ready in the airlock, once again being pragmatic as they discuss what to do with a body. Even though they're looking for a survivor, it is good to know what to do. They agree to take something for the person's family. While the airlock decompresses, Emily asks Nora and Captain if they have family. The captain's daughter is mentioned again, with him saying she's 14, but Nora disputes it, saying she must be her age. Captain hand waves it away as just a mistake, but the fact he's more shaken than he's ever been so far says a lot. Outside on the platform, Smith and Abel look for the pod, and everything is quite unstable, so they don't have long. However, there might be another strange problem, as Abel thinks he can hear birds chirping. But it's just passed off as the mind playing tricks. They eventually find the pod, but any question of survivors is soon answered as it's imploded and covered in some kind of slime. There is a body tangled in wires, but it's very strange as it's all cut up and undulating. Until... And that will be the second alien reference for the evening. Abel is attacked by some unknown creature, and turns out those guns came in very handy, as Smith shoots it, taking it out immediately as the thing is taken back to the elevator for inspection. Which will be our third alien reference. And come to think of it, it's probably a good thing that these creatures don't have acid blood, because that would be quite devastating underneath the ocean. And possibly worse than in space, because of atmospheric pressure, you know? There you go, alien writers. Freebie new idea for you. Emily inspects the creature. It even moves involuntarily a la Alien. And she does have the biggest understatement of the film.
I think this might be a new species.
You think? You think the tentacled monstrosity that eats human flesh and has taloned appendages might be a new species? That's a really dumb thing to say, unless something went horribly wrong in this future universe. But when it rains, it pours as the entire system for the elevator goes down. They think that they can descend manually, however, weird sounds from outside make them stop and listen as something starts banging on the hull, with Abel asking the important questions.
It's probably not a good time to ask, but is that a baby?
The film has been very coy about whether there is or isn't a monster, and I wanted to say that I really appreciate the slow progression and building of tension to the full-on creature feature reveal, because all we've had up to now is just foreboding sounds, so it gives the audience that chance to fill in the gaps and just wonder what the hell is making that noise. The elevator is completely disengaged, but something is stopping it moving, and more tentacles are spotted through a porthole, and even something a bit humanoid. However, once again, the creatures will have to wait as Kepler has decided now's the time to explode, causing the elevator to freefall, with everyone having to rush into the pressure chamber because they'll need to open the outdoor hatch before hitting the seabed, otherwise they'll be crushed. Fortunately, that part is fairly simple. Now they need to run to escape the falling Kepler debris, with Smith saving Nora and taking the hit, showing just how sturdy these suits are, as it took the brunt of the force. Everyone manages to get inside fine, but there's plenty of gnashing of teeth and wailing screams just before the door closes. It's giving me an out of the frying pan into the fire feel to the proceedings, and that's literally the progression of the film. The characters going from a very real and knowable threat in the station disaster, and as they go deeper down, the disaster becomes less of a priority as this new unknown eldritch horror takes centre stage. Turns out Smith is fine. His oxygen scrubber took most of the hit. He only took in a few fumes, however, it does mean that his suit might not last much longer. Inside, Nora needs a code to get the monorail moving, so Captain hands her a gun, and she shows once again how invaluable she is to the party, getting it working quite quickly. Naturally, nothing goes smoothly as the tunnel is filling with water and no way to drain it, so it's more walking. They spot some snacks floating in the water, and Emily mentions that moon pie is her favourite, setting up a nice character moment later. The tunnel is also partially collapsed and seemingly impassable, but Nora, being the smallest, volunteers to check if they can get through. Nora discovers they'll be able to get through the collapsed section, so Captain starts sending everyone through, and going through, Abel gives Smith the moon pie to give to Emily. I really like how that was set up, and again, another moment to show Abel as not just a wisecracker. Come to think of it, should I be worried that the film is really hammering home how nice a guy Abel is? Yeah. Abel is the last one to go through to the other side, but something has caught up with him, and the others hear him struggling over the radio, so they start pulling him through. But surprise, surprise, he makes it through okay. Well, until the guideline gets caught on something and starts pulling him back through. They manage to get his helmet on before he's pulled under the water. However, he's given arguably one of the more grisly deaths I've ever seen, as he's pulled out of the suit through the leg hole. Which certainly shows the more Lovecraftian side of this horror film, because Abel was arguably the most compassionate out of everyone, and the film just straight up showed how little that actually mattered. And in fact, he didn't even get a death full of nobility and heroics. It's just an uncaring universe after all. Everyone else reaches the midway station, and while Captain tries to radio for help, Nora sits with the bunny toy. And now I can talk about that damn bunny. Throughout the film, Abel has been overly affectionate, to say the least, with a stuffed toy bunny, acting like it's really alive. I thought they were going to say something like, oh, that's his child's toy or something. But no, it goes completely unexplained. However, it turns out the stuffed bunny was supposed to be a real live bunny. The director told T.J. Miller to act like it was alive, and they would change it in post. But that never happened. So instead of making Abel look caring and nurturing, he just looks a little bit psychotic, which is a delightful detail. Smith and Emily look outside into the water and they can see the boring drill. A drill weighing 6,000 tons has been ripped up and cast aside, showing that they won't just be dealing with small creatures that tear open a man like a can of sardines. There's something bigger out there. There's some reflection on whether they're being punished for taking too much and drilling too deep, but there's never enough time to recuperate as Captain sees the windows are cracking, and while they can, they take a look at Smith's suit, which doesn't look like it can be fixed. Smith tells Nora he should be left behind, but for now, he's able to continue. And back outside, they're following markers across the seabed. And for most underwater scenes, we can actually see way more than the actors ever could. The way they filmed it was the actors were in pitch black, and they used volumetric scanning by adding atmosphere and having flashlights move through the particles, so they were able to approximate the density of the water around everyone. Which you have to admit is a lot more work to get convincing underwater scenes than a lot of films go through. While walking, they lose sight of the markers they were following, but they do find something else. That was a pretty good jump scare. However, what I really like about it is if you look closely, you can see the creature avoid Nora's light several times, which shows a disturbing level of intelligence, because it's not just unseen, it wants to remain hidden. Everyone decides to turn off the lights so they can at least be difficult to find, and if you think that's a bad idea, you'd be right, as the creature is spotted again and Smith is suddenly gone. They then see him being dragged into some structure and Captain goes in after him. Once again, Smith defies the odds as he's found alive, and well, I guess this is what he gets for wearing the number 13 suit. Captain has left the gun behind and insists on going back for it when he is also taken by a creature. And because he's attached to others, everyone goes all over the place, with Nora ending up on a lighted platform. And I have to point out that scene again. The scene of Nora flipping and tumbling and landing onto the platform. The director is really proud of that shot, and he really should be, because there's no CGI there. Well, there's CGI for the water effects, but apart from that, it's entirely practical. Which is also a testament to the CGI of the rest of the film, because you can't really tell the difference. Everyone's been scattered, which makes me wonder if the creature is going for a divide and conquer strategy, as the creature skitters around the platform, avoiding the lights. And the light avoidance thing has the added bonus of, even though we're looking straight at it, we still don't know exactly what this creature looks like. The creature does get quite up close and personal with Nora though, clamping its mouth over her helmet. Captain starts hitting it, which I guess those suits would be a little like power armor. The creature swims away but knocks Captain and Nora off the platform and they start sinking. They're sinking too fast, the pressure is starting to crush the suit, so Captain has to make the obvious sacrifice, telling Nora to let him go, but she can't do it. After all, this would be the fourth death she has been directly or indirectly responsible for. At least, that's how she would see it. And she already told Smith that she doesn't want to lose anyone else, so it makes complete sense that she'd try desperately to keep anyone and everyone alive, even to the detriment of herself. Unfortunately though, Captain makes the choice for her, and the subsequent shockwave is enough to slow Nora's descent, and after a brief blackout she wakes up on the ocean bed alone with sirens blaring. Some large tentacled mass swipes at her from the darkness, but it doesn't seem to chase her, showing how this is not one creature here, it's a whole ecosystem. She eventually manages to reach a man-made structure, Shepherd Drill, the old abandoned site, but it seems to have power and air, so it's better than nothing. Inside and out of the suit, Nora has a small, understandable breakdown, and as she tries to radio Emily and Smith, we see the corridors of the Shepherd station. And you can tell right from the start that there's something not right about this station. If you look at the corridors of the Kepler, it's rustic, but it's bright, lightly coloured and airy. In comparison, the Shepherd is darkly coloured, sickly lit and claustrophobic. The implication being that for Nora, this station might not be as safe a haven as it appears, and there's something nefarious under the surface, that maybe it was abandoned for a very good reason. Because, going back to the newspaper clippings at the start, a number of them say how the company is disregarding reports of strange occurrences. However, I suspect they knew more than they let on, which I'll get to later. Nora doesn't manage to get through to anyone, and while looking around she finds Captain's old locker, filled with all his stuff, including a card of his daughter who died when she was 14. Making it clear why he didn't want to go to the Shepherd station. The Captain couldn't face it. That's why he left all his stuff there and the card. And he proved that in the elevator when he spoke about his daughter like she was still alive. Nora has to repair her suit, but she's reluctant to go back outside. But if she's going out there again, she's going out armed, as she finds a rather beefy flare gun, and repurposing one of the old Shepherd suits starts walking. There's no indication that her radio signal is being received, but she continues to talk just in case, and eventually she starts to hear Emily on the radio, and you can see Nora briefly wonder if it's just a hallucination, but she can see drag marks in the silt, and lights up ahead. They're right next to each other, but Emily is completely unaware. Emily can't hear Nora, so freaks out a bit when something comes at her from the darkness. Makes sense, really. But after tackling her to the ground, Emily sees that it's Nora. Smith is also alive, but continues his bad luck as he's having to be dragged by Emily. They're running low on oxygen, and even though it's not the best idea, they talk to keep spirits up, and Nora opens up for the first time talking about her fiancé. And going back to the newspaper clippings again, they state a mysterious disappearance. Well, turns out that was Nora's fiancé. It's possible it wasn't referring to him and there are multiple disappearances, but it's too much of a coincidence to ignore. They manage to reach the Roebuck, which looks relatively fine from this distance. They make their way inside with glowing red lights, which probably isn't a good sign. The water is also even more murky here, and that's when they see why, as hundreds of the creatures are hanging from the ceiling, hopefully sleeping or hibernating, so the three of them will have to navigate through with only the glowing red lights to guide them. This is hands down my favourite scene of the film, because by now the explosion has been completely forgotten and the creatures are front and centre, quite literally, and we now see how big of a problem they really are. There's also another reason I like this scene, but we'll get to that. They get through very slowly, and Nora loads the flare gun in readiness. The creatures seem dormant for now, and thus easy to navigate, even with Emily's suit sounding an alarm due to her low oxygen levels. Nothing disturbs them. Even Nora gets a flipper slap to the face, and seemingly nothing happens. But their luck soon runs out, and a creature attacks as it slams the hell out of her, throwing her around the platform. It's pretty brutal. Then it actually tries eating her whole. But Nora has the flare gun, which kills it instantly as she tears herself out of its dead body. But of course, that wasn't the only one. Nora loads another flare, but it's hardly going to make a dint. However, turns out the creatures are the least of Nora's worries now, as that's when she realises that the creatures aren't attached to the ceiling. There is no ceiling, as it floats away into the darkness, and the lights of the station illuminates a massive creature that the smaller ones were growing out of. And I shit you not, by the director's own admission, that's just straight up Cthulhu. It's not a lookalike. It's not a vague, enormous monstrosity that might be Cthulhu. That's literally Cthulhu. Which was a hell of a surprise to me when I first saw this. Also, I just want to go back to those creatures for a second. It's now clear why the creatures were as dormant as they were. They weren't sleeping, they still hadn't been born yet. Because the creature's life cycle was based around the very real Suriname toad. Warning! Horrifying act of nature incoming! Warning! The Suriname toad grows its young on its back. They start out as eggs, and then the young grow in a pocket on the mother's back. As you can see, it's pretty horrifying. So it would make sense they would incorporate that into Cthulhu. Apologies if I've scarred anyone for life there. Also, this would be one of the first times I've ever seen the phrase "a mountain walked or stumbled" from the Call of Cthulhu story embodied effectively. Nora is still unsure what the hell she's seeing, but when she fires a flare, it becomes very clear, and it's now aware of her. Nora quickly makes a run for the door, but Cthulhu has other ideas, destroying the platform, causing another massive explosion, which we see in glorious slow motion. Nora blacks out from the shockwave. Surprisingly, she hasn't suffered massive head trauma yet, but she wakes up while being dragged by Emily as they get into the airlock. Nora's suit is malfunctioning and out of oxygen, so Emily is forced to smash her in the face with a fire hydrant, which is just funny to say, but obviously it's to break the helmet. Which is considered a bit of a mistake because a helmet designed to withstand 15,000 psi shouldn't be able to break so easily. However, if you take into account of all the punishments the helmet has gone through, and Emily only really breaking it a little bit, she doesn't really shatter it, I don't really see it as a big deal, especially when you take into account that this takes place in the future, and who knows what kind of futuristic polymers are involved here. Emily and Nora have to carry Smith through the station to the escape pods, and although I respect the director's pro-feminist interpretation of this scene, the two women having to carry the man, it's an interesting juxtaposition to the cliched horror film status quo. However, having them in quite skimpy underwear while they do it, and Smith being basically fully clothed, sends a bit of mixed messages, I'd say. They reach the control room and can see Big Cthulhu outside the window, and the computer voice, again, really not helping.
TN Industries, we've got big things in store for you.
Yeah, no shit. And although that was obviously a joke, I do believe the company is not only aware of the Eldritch Abomination, but is actively helping it. Because we never actually find out what caused the initial Kepler explosion. And although it's never stated, I prefer to think that it was caused deliberately. Because when you think about it, the Kepler and Roebuck are so far apart, why would one cause the other to explode? Also, the creatures didn't start being a problem until the party got quite far down and closer to the drill. So I suspect the company is run by cultists, the explosion was some kind of offering, and the drilling is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, summon Cthulhu. But of course, this is just my interpretation. The doors start slamming around them as corridors collapse, which is interesting that here they're automatic, whereas on the Kepler they were manual, almost as if the company wanted the drill to continue at all costs, but not really give a shit about the people above. Cthulhu continues to destroy the place, but they do reach the escape pod bay with pods still available, also implying that there weren't many, if any, people on the Roebuck when this went down. There's 3 pods, but one isn't working. It's 1 person per pod as well. So Nora knows what she has to do. People have been dying for her sake the entire time, so it's looking like it's her turn as they strap Smith in, Nora giving him the stuffed bunny. Although, the bunny must have gotten its wish, as it magically turns into a real rabbit just before Smith launches. See? Told you it was supposed to be a real rabbit. Obviously just a missed scene they forgot to reshoot or thought it wasn't necessary, but I like to think that sanity is slipping just a little bit, and everyone is starting to think slightly like Abel did. After all, Cthulhu is literally outside the window. Emily wants Nora to go first, and she notices that the other pod isn't working. Nora claims she can fix it, but Emily doesn't want to leave her, so Nora is forced to punch Emily in the face to get her into the pod, accepting Nora's sacrifice. Outside, Cthulhu and its creatures see the pods leaving, and they begin to swarm after them. Nora relaxes, waits for the end, being able to just watch Cthulhu, and clearly it's one petty bitch, as it releases the smaller creatures after the escaping pods, and Nora can see they aren't going to be able to make the surface without some help. So Nora decides to make the Roebuck core go critical. The subsequent blast will eliminate the creatures, but leave the pods intact. and even though it's in narration, I like the fact that Nora gets a badass line to go out on.
You lose your sense of time in the dark. So let's light this shit up.
The explosion hits, seemingly destroying Cthulhu, although I have doubts, and Nora gets a brief moment of serenity just before the explosion engulfs the entire station. We then shift to newspaper clippings, firstly telling us that the film takes place in 2050, so the near future, and that Smith and Emily did manage to reach the surface, with the company not allowing them to be interviewed and denying any kind of explanation. There is an interesting detail though, as there's a report marked secret and it's dated a year later, so the investigation went on for quite a while. Also, weirdly, the stuffed rabbit is documented in the report. Maybe there was something to that thing all along. And the film ends with the ominous news that the company will be resuming drilling as soon as cleanup has finished. Potential sequel? I don't think so. It doesn't seem like the director William Eubanks' style to do sequels. I think it's just a little detail to imply that things aren't over. So that was Underwater, and I can't begin to tell you how much I love this film. But, do you know what? This isn't a Lovecraftian adaptation. No, this is an adaptation of the Call of Cthulhu tabletop RPG. Seriously, everything about this film feels like someone's tabletop game. A well-written one, I might add. You've got the slow ramping up of tension. You've got the quirky characters with all their own personalities and styles. You've got the whole party being killed off by a merciless GM thing. The only thing you don't have is everyone rolling for sanity every 2 minutes, because trust me, that would have been necessary. Seriously, to hell with the Dungeons and Dragons films. This is how you do an RPG-based film right. It's a shame this film didn't get as much recognition as it should have, but in a way, it's also to its benefit, because you don't expect the giant monster. I know I didn't. And again, like I said at the start, the best mythos stories are the ones that don't tell you they are mythos stories. Also, I feel remiss if I don't talk about the much maligned Kristen Stewart. Even I in the past have said I don't like her. However, especially after this film, I think she's great. She has a very specific and distinctive style, but it certainly works for this film. She was believable and, quite frankly, completely badass to be able to do the things she does in this film. I'll be defending her completely from now on. One thing I really think needs mentioning. There is an alternate ending which sees Nora fixing the pod, somehow, and managing to escape. This may seem the more appealing ending for people, but to me, it's far too contrived. Some positives I can say about it is that it finishes Nora's pessimism arc because she chooses to be optimistic. Also, she fixes the pod using the necklace she's been wearing and touching throughout the film, so that's a nice clear through line, even if it is, as I said, quite contrived. The main reason I can't get on board with it, though, is that it's far too neat and clean an ending, requiring Nora's aforementioned personality change to accommodate the plot. Also, what does it say about Abel's death? That proved this universe is cold and uncaring. I think it needs to be stated that sometimes the best you can do is go down fighting. I'm glad they didn't use this alternate ending. And if you're wondering why Nora didn't go insane from looking at Cthulhu so many times, just remember that at the start, she was wearing glasses which she subsequently lost, so she couldn't see shit anyway. Also, it's kind of for the best that TJ Miller didn't get to see Cthulhu, because he would have been having serious Cloverfield flashbacks. Also, come to think of it, John Gallagher Jr. was in 10 Cloverfield Lane as well. That's a strange connection. One last thing I have to talk about is the effects, because they are incredible, and they don't go overboard either. Everything, for the most part, looks realistic, which is why the CGI and the practical stuff mesh together so well. This film did such an amazing job of making the ocean look like another planet, especially the Mariana Trench, which even today we've only explored about 6% worth. You kind of forget that this film is still on Earth. The suits that look like astronaut suits help as well, of course. So in conclusion, Underwater is by far one of the best new additions to the mythos. And we're nearly done with H.P. Lovecraft Month now, but of course I couldn't finish without looking at one of my most requested films. And with its connection to Mandy, of course I'm all for it. So join me next week as I take a look at the colour out of space. See you then. Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to give a massive thank you to all my Patreon donators. Their support really does help a lot. And if you would like to contribute to the channel and gain access to the Deusdaecon Reviews Discord server, the link is in the description below. And if you would like to get more content aside from the reviews, please consider checking out the Twitch channel where I stream live 5 days a week, 9 PM GMT, with subjects ranging from Let's Plays, discussions and movie watch-along nights. So join me live if you wish to see stunning moments of strategy just like this one. You, trade with me. Oh! That was a mistake! That was a mistake! Holy shit! What? Fuck! The link is in the description, so I'll hopefully see you there. And on YouTube, I'll see you next time.